Welcome back, everybody. Today, we are presenting you with episode 6 of the Dateable AF podcast. Our topic for today is first date vibes, the good, the bad, and the what was that.
Woohoo!
We have all had that date, the one that left us swooning, squirming, or maybe just stunned.
All the above.
Yes, so Rachel has been having quite a few first dates over this past year or so. So she's going to be our resident expert, and I have been talking to her a lot about that and talking to clients about that. So we're actually excited to share some things with you guys. I wanted to get started by asking you, Rachel, what do you think are the signs of a great first date?
The good vibes, eh? I
Yep.
think that a great first date is communication to me is central theme on a great first date.
Yep.
The flow, the common sharing of the time, the leaning in and being interested, but that conversation piece is key. And I notice it right off the bat. If it's stilted or weird, not because someone's sort of nervous, but just
If it just doesn't flow.
right. That's a big one.
Yeah, we've talked in previous episodes about the idea that you have to be interested. So you have to be willing to show up with questions for the other person and be genuinely curious, but also being interesting. That's a part of having a great conversation.
Yeah, I was thinking about that today because I have so many friends that are app dating and dating a lot more prolifically than I am. And one of the things they talk about is just the frustration on the first date of not knowing if they want a second date or if the other person's wanting a second date. And then oftentimes I ask them, well, what did you talk about? And so much of the time they're not really good at telling me what they talked about. And it's because they're not listening and they're thinking about what they're going to say. They're just thinking about how they're going to respond. And I think part of that can be nerves. And part of that is, Sarah, you and I were talking about this the other day, just listening so that actually your questions come from what you're hearing and not a long laundry list of shit you got in your head.
Oh my God, so true. Because I think we hear this about asking questions, being curious. And what some people do with that is they turn that into an interview. I was in a situation recently where someone was asking good questions, but I felt like I was in a job interview because the questions were literally like apropos of nothing. Like, what's your favorite kind of ice cream? And you're like, oh, we weren't even talking about ice cream.
I know. It's like they come prepared with this whole thing or they're so excited to put forward what they already have in their mind. They're thinking about that. Okay, I'm on my date. I'm going to talk about this, and this.
Yes.
And when you're doing that, you're not listening.
No, you're not listening. It's sort of like if you're in a group setting and you're going around a circle and everybody's saying something, you don't really hear anything that was said until your turn because you're so worried about what you're going to say when it's your turn. And I think that exact thing happens on dates too.
Yeah. And I think that also people don't think a lot about when they're typically if you're on a first date, most of the time you're say at a coffee shop or a restaurant or maybe having a drink with someone. And if you're paying attention to how people are interacting with staff, it's, I think, incredibly important. It's a window into their personality and says a lot about who they are. If they are pushy or dismissive of wait staff, if they're very kind and generous, that's a very big green flag, I think.
Yep. What about tipping?
Yeah. If they are pinchy, no, these people work hard.
Yes, for sure.
For the money. They're waiting on your ass when you probably wearing them out over a $1.50 cup of coffee for hours.
Exactly. That's so true. So what are some of the things that you have noticed on a past date, either positive or negative, about how people interact with staff or waiters?
I've definitely noticed the dismissive nature. So not really when they bring something to the table, not looking at the person. I always want to look at them when they come and bring me my drink or whatever, my salt and pepper, and say thank you and look at
Sure.
the person in the eye and then go right back into my conversation. And I do notice it jumps out at me when people have that similar reaction.
For sure. And what about when someone has a complaint? If their food wasn't right or they didn't get something that they ordered, what do you notice about those interactions?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, that I definitely notice if people are punchy right off the bat or rude,
Mhm.
because there's a very simple way to ask somebody, "Hey, I did I miscommunicate?" Or
Yes.
for
Instead of
somebody like,
demanding that they get
yeah,
something, for sure.
right.
Yeah. I think it's also, I don't know if I would consider
Mhm.
this either a red flag or a green flag, but I also notice when people won't speak up for themselves. So if they ordered a particular thing and they didn't get that thing or they got something wrong, sometimes people will just be like, no, no, it's no big deal. And they won't speak up. I think for me, that actually might be a red flag. If,
Interesting. Huh. Yeah. Well, it would seem like it would be the most simple place to ask for what you need.
yes.
So I could see how that could be very complicated and difficult in a relationship.
Yeah. Like if you're not going to ask the waiter, oh, I actually ordered cream for my coffee, and you're afraid to speak up about that, then how's it going to be if you're in a relationship with that person? So yes, I'm changing my answer. I do think that's a red flag. If somebody gets something wrong and they're not willing to speak up about it.
Penalty, you changed your answer.
Exactly, exactly. So I do think that paying attention though to how people treat service providers, waiters, all of the above it's something to pay attention to, especially on a first date. They're putting their best foot forward. So if they're being rude on a first date, you can imagine where that's probably going from there.
Yeah, this is a really complicated thing of finding the green flag with if you have an emotional connection to somebody or
Mhm.
you have an automatic sort of sense that there could be a romantic connection on that
Mhm.
first on that first date. Um, and
But
I don't know if that's
that's
always a green flag or a red flag too.
yeah, who knows? I think that's a hard thing to quantify too. So if you think about it, when you've had a first date recently, and I know you've had some that clicked pretty well right from the get-go, what did you notice? I mean, is it even something that you can describe?
That's the problem. It's very hard to describe. One thing I do notice is if someone is confident in
Yes.
themselves, that comes across. It comes
Yes.
across in how they address you, and it also comes across in just the way that they engage you in conversation. And I think confidence is extremely sexy.
Yes.
And so I noticed that typically right off the bat.
It's one of the things that almost across the board people report that as something that they find attractive, that they're attracted to confident people. So the takeaway from that is if you're not comfortable in your own skin, figure out how to get comfortable in your own skin because that's the best thing you can do to attract the right partner.
Yep, that is spot on. And I do have a personal story I can share on this little section
Please do.
about a green flag first date.
Okay.
We'll call her Monique.
Okay. Monique is back
Monique.
again.
Yes, Monique out there, you'll know who you are when you hear this.
Somebody's cringing right now.
But it is an example. So I go out on what I thought was actually a dinner, it was a dinner engagement with someone that I had not seen in a very long time and known from a past life.
Mhm.
Um, and not like a reincarnation.
I was going to say, just to clarify, this isn't Rachel being wooed.
This is like before in my earlier years.
Yes, let's clarify. Shirley MacLaine.
Yeah, thank you. So anyway, we over dinner when I thought we were just going to reconnect around what's been going on lately. It became apparent she opened the door to me of, hey, I known you all these many years, and I've had a crush on you all these many years.
Aw.
And so I was very surprised, and because she goes back to my past, way back when Sarah and I first started hanging out together. And I was shocked, and she's very, very sexy and attractive. So there I was on what then switched on me to almost like a first date.
Hmm.
So I went, oh my, okay, all right. Well, I can flow with this because all the other things we just talked about, those things were all in play.
Yes.
So
Good
we were,
conversation, kind to the
yes,
wait staff. Okay.
all that was happening, good connection. And so what I did was I just leaned over and said, then why don't you ask me out?
I like it.
Yeah,
Speaking of asking for what you want.
I did.
Okay.
And then
Good job.
I know. And she said, I will. Really? Would you go? Well, I wouldn't have put it out there
Right.
if I was going to go and sing.
It's like Lucy with the football and Charlie Brown, like, psych, you can ask me out, but I'm going to say no.
Right. Well, and then I got very bold and said, why don't you ask me out? And then when we pay out, we're going to walk to the car and I'm going to kiss you.
Ooh.
And then
that's what happened?
And then you're going to ask me on a proper date.
There you go. I like it. Well, the things I like about that are that she put it out there that she was interested in you. So that was great that she was willing to be direct about it, and that you latched onto that and talked to her very directly about it, told her what you wanted, which was for her to ask you out. And then you told her you were going to kiss her. Yep. And presumably you did.
I certainly did.
So that is a good example of a positive first date.
And if, to the point we're making, if there had been a lot of red flags in that conversation, I would not have, if she had put that forward, I would have done something like say, wow, I am so flattered. How nice. And I would have left it right there.
Yep. So you would have given her directly the feedback that you weren't interested in going on a date with her. Because to my recollection, you've also had that happen at least one time with a person who let you know that she was interested in you and you were not interested in a date with her. And you said, basically, that's never going to happen.
Hey, be careful.
Yeah, that one was with Veronica, though, not Monique.
Just to be clear.
Yes. And just to remind you that when we want to speak about people anonymously, we either name them Monique or Veronica. So it could be anybody.
And I have had some of my friends who think they might be talked about on this podcast tell me which name they would prefer to be called.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, in case the one who you declined the date with gave a preference, I apologize if it was not Veronica.
No, it was not. Okay.
I love it. Okay, so now that we've talked about some green flags and things that make for a good first date, let's go the other direction and let's talk about things that might give you some bad vibes. As we like to say, why did I put on pants for this?
I love it. The bad vibes are probably easier because
there's so many of them.
Bad behavior. I love I love this whole thing of what do people talk about on the first date?
Yeah.
And I am stunned at how many people talk about their exes on the first date.
Why? Why are you doing that? Nobody wants to hear your war stories about your ex on the first date. So you say something like, it didn't work out. We were very different people. You could just give it a blanket statement like that, but do not diagnose your ex with a personality disorder on the first date. That is a big red flag.
God, it is a party foul all the way around.
Yeah, she was narcissistic. Oh, really? Okay.
And if you're in a small community, chances are you're going to run into her ex.
Yes, of course. So don't do that, people. If you have bad things to say about your ex, you go say that to your therapist. You don't say that on a first date. That is a big red flag.
The other one we were sort of talking about a little bit was the vibes of an interview versus, asking questions that you really want the answers to.
Yes.
So we touched on that in the green flag section, but it's worthy of conversation.
Revisiting that for sure. Because
Yes,
you know when someone's asking because they're genuinely curious versus they're asking because they're checking a box. You can feel the difference.
right. And if you don't get an extension off of what you've said, then
Hmm.
I think oftentimes that shows that somebody they really are going through the laundry list of questions. And I thought about, on our first episode, we did our coming out stories. And today I was pondering, why is it so important for women to bring forth their coming out stories?
Hmm.
And I realized as I was pondering that though you might not do that on the first date, you very well may.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's necessarily inappropriate, depending
No.
on the flow of the conversation. And I realized one reason that I think it's so uh, appropriate and prevalent for gay women is because that's typically a landmark time in your life.
Yes.
So unlike, having your first kiss as a boy and a girl, for gay folks, that then opens the door for a lot of things that are about to change in their lives
Yes.
at the moment.
And
Yeah,
I know this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but do you think that that seminal nature of that is different for younger folks today because coming out's not quite as big a deal as it was for those of us that are a little older?
I do in some ways because I don't they all have parents and they all have family members,
Hmm.
and it is inevitable that and friends, some that will receive the information well and some that won't.
Yeah.
And what I was thinking about in relation to that was just this whole idea of listening and not. So a great example is if somebody is sharing that with you, then if the immediate reaction after they say, well, I came out when I was in 10th grade,
Hmm.
and then I was scared because then, she left and she went to college and I was left behind.
Hmm.
Then they listen to whatever short or long version you give of that.
Hmm.
And then if the first response that you get is, well, when I came out, I blah, 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 you are not listening.
Yep. That person was just listening to respond. They weren't listening for content.
Right.
Yep.
And so then what dawned on me was that is a great example of why when you sometimes walk away on a first date or a second date, that you feel like you didn't know some things about somebody that you wish you would have known.
Hmm.
It's because there is so much that is possible in that coming out. For instance, have they really come out? Or are
Yeah.
they still in the closet?
That's
Does
a
that
great question.
Does that work for you? And it's
Hmm.
perfectly fine if they are. I'm not being judgmental at all, but I'm trying to bring home the point that there are tons of possible learnings in that moment that you could say, oh, I would tend to go, oh gosh, that sounds like a really scary time. I mean, how did your parents deal with that?
Yep.
What did you and that leads you to learn so much more about someone that later on you complain that you wish you would have known about them. You just
That's,
weren't listening.
yes, that's so true. And thinking about confidence, that coming out story tells you something about someone's level of confidence. Because if they've decided that they're going to date women, but they haven't told anyone yet, then that might be a confidence issue. If they are not willing to be out to their family, that could be a confidence issue. So all of that stuff is really important. And if you don't ask the next question about their coming out story, you're not going to find those things out.
Yeah, it's very true. And um like I said, I was just so curious about why those stories are really important to us, and it
Yeah.
became clear to me that that's why. And I don't think that's necessarily a conversation that you would hold on to very long. I think it's pretty common that you would share that early on in dating.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, unless there's something weird or if the person's shameful about it for some reason, then I don't know what that would be, but yeah, if I'm telling my coming out story and somebody doesn't ask me more about the horsewoman with the tiny arms, I'm gonna be real sad.
If y'all want to know any more about that, just you can contact me.
Rachel have plenty to say about that, I'm sure.
Yes, one of our listeners said that she was really wishing that there was still a bar with a disco saddle.
I know that's a shame. I wonder what happened to that disco saddle. Do you think it went to some like a flea market somewhere?
So it's at the boys' gay bar,
It might be.
Gillies in Fort Worth.
Exactly. That Gillies is not worthy of that disco saddle.
They didn't know where it was original home was.
That needs some
Gillies.
lesbians dancing under it. Oh, okay. So back to our red flags. So talking about your ex, definite red flag, perhaps not asking questions or not seeming interested, doing the interview. What else have you noticed that you would consider a red flag on a first date?
The trauma, bringing forward a lot of your personal trauma is just too much for a first. It's almost too much for you need to have a couple of dates.
Yes, for sure.
There. And that before you inundate somebody with what all your stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And I think people confuse vulnerability with oversharing, that people have to earn the right to your story, to the vulnerable parts of your story. And trauma is one of those things that almost every human, I will say this as a therapist, almost every human has experienced some kind of trauma in their lifetime. The first date is not the place that you want to share that. And I know people sort of develop an identity around trauma sometimes, and it scares people off. I see people on both sides of that equation. And if you are a trauma survivor and it's part of your identity and you want to tell someone on a first date about, the horrible abuse that you suffered or the assault that you suffered, that's not something that usually is going to pull them in. That's something that's going to put up a little barrier. So save those things until someone's earned the right to hear those very personal things.
Yes, most people are going to run screaming from that.
Yes, for sure.
And then there's this, so the opposite of that is having a vault that's so tightly shut that you don't share anything personal at all.
Yes.
It is also, to me, a red flag, because that if you're sort of private and appropriately reserved,
yes,
then that can be very appealing. It makes you seem
mysterious.
Makes you seem healthy and mysterious. But if there are 3 doors on the vault, then I think, oh no, I don't have enough hours in the day, and this is going to be exhausting for me to get.
Yes. This is not an escape room that you're trying to solve. This is a date.
Well, it could be. It might be. That's a possibility.
Yes. So red flags could be no door on the vault at all, and all that stuff's just spilling out, or too many doors on the vault, which is just too much work. I don't know. Maybe if I was younger, but I wouldn't want to work that hard, to be honest.
No, I'm hearing it now, and I will tell you, you gotta open up a little bit. And it's okay if you want to scatter those out a bit. You don't have to fillet your soul out there, but you can't have 3 locks on the door.
Of course. And I think sometimes I have a skewed perspective about this because I'm a therapist and I talk to people about private things all day long. And I'm also a pretty open person. So if you ask me a question, I'm most likely just going to answer it. But I'm always surprised at the things that people bristle about.
Right.
Something as simple as, oh, are you gay? That, we had an instance where that came up at a dinner party recently, and the person was very taken aback by being asked that question. And it's like, I don't think of that as being a personal question if you know someone well enough to be at their house for dinner. That seems like fair game. But not everyone takes it that way. So some people are, I frequently get the feedback of like, wow, I can't believe you asked that.
Yes.
Like, oh, sorry. Seemed appropriate at the time, but maybe not.
I noticed that I know. And we both sometimes the gate doesn't come down in time and it just gets right out there and
Something
it
just slips out
slips out.
accidentally. A question
Well,
like that.
it seems so obvious to talk about, but obviously
Yep.
not to everyone. And I will say that maybe you've had an experience with somebody. If you are that private a person, then maybe you have had an experience with someone where that matched,
Mhm.
and that level of privacy and I think slow sharing
Mhm.
in it. If you're going, I think it needs to match.
Yes,
Be-
that's true.
bec- so, and I also can see where that might make it very difficult to date, because if you are that reserved and you're behind so many doors, I don't know how anybody would ever know that you'd want to go out with
Want to
them.
go out with them. I know. You're exactly right. And I've heard these stories. I mean, we heard them when we were doing our beta test groups with Get Dateable, that, women would go out 4 or 5 times and they would never kiss, they would never hold hands because they were never clear whether it was a date or not. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I think if you're too buttoned up, that does not seem like you're going to invite in the partnership that you want. So we'll consider that on the red flag list.
And then the exiting of this, I have had experiences where somebody has been sitting before me and expressed an interest,
Mhm.
and then I, again, I think we have to be grown-ups and just finding nice ways to say, "Hey, thank you so much. I'm flattered, and I'm really just not in a position where I want to do that right now."
Yeah, perfect. I mean, let's go back. It's called the shit sandwich. You say the nice thing, then you put the little shit in the middle, and then you sandwich it with another nice thing. You say, "Thank you so much. That's so flattering. I'm not in a position where I want to date right now. You're a great person. I'm sure you're going to find the right person." Just
You just
slide the shit right in between those two nice
don't
things.
even notice the shit.
They can barely even taste that shit because it's sandwiched in between two good things.
Swear to God, I'm never going to get another date when this is over.
Now, if they're going to recognize, they were like, "Oh, that was a shit sandwich, wasn't it?" I'm
Exactly.
sorry, but yes.
You're throwing out all my moves. Putting them right out here for everybody to hear.
We're just sharing your successful moves with the world so they can all try it too. What do you think about someone who shows up late for a first date?
Well, I think that if they show up 5 minutes late, then, and especially if they acknowledge it, I am so sorry. Something happened, whatever. But I think you need to acknowledge it.
Yeah, for sure. So sometimes people will show up late and never acknowledge that at all. And that to me seems problematic because they're not respectful of time, it seems like. And maybe that may not be a priority to everyone, but that is a priority to me. That if
I, I agree. And especially if it happens over and over again. And 5 minutes here or there is one thing. But if they
Sure.
are always sort of late,
Yes, not going to work.
I'm going to be judgmental about it. Say
You can be
that.
judgy.
I'm going to be judgy.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, I think that is true. That's a red flag. And now we have Google Maps that tell you exactly what time you're going to arrive. So if you're at a red light and you see on your map that you're going to be 3 minutes late, shoot a text over and say, "Hey, sorry, I'm running 3 minutes late. I'll see you soon."
Right.
Because it is nerve wracking, especially if it's a first date and you're waiting for someone to show up. There's always that moment of like, "Ooh, are they coming?"
Yeah.
So you just let someone know if you're running late. If not, I think it's a red flag.
Ditto.
Yep. One of my personal favorite, or I guess I should say least favorite red flags is people who play mean.
Mm, yeah.
If you are going to make a joke about someone, make a positive joke.
Yeah.
Don't make a negative, don't play mean with somebody about, nothing's really coming to mind right now, but I know you and I've talked about this before, but someone who will just take a little dig at you and that just feels bad. Someone who's going to, insult you and then be like, "Haha, I'm just kidding." It's like, no, that's not funny.
And if they will take a sort of a dig or use some sarcasm like that in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
when they should be on their best behavior,
Yeah.
they are going to be bad
Yeah.
later.
Yes. What's going to happen? when you're in a relationship with them and they're comfortable with you. So just look for that for people who say something mean-spirited in the guy under the guise of it being a joke. Because to me, that's not funny and that's a red flag.
Yeah.
What about love bombing?
Oh, I'm always scared of anybody who compliments me too much in the beginning of anything. Makes you feel weird.
Yes.
Creepy.
It's super creepy. And people who say things like, I've never felt like this before. Like, no, do not say that on the first date. Even if you've never felt like this before, you don't say that on the first date.
No.
Or second or third.
Right.
It's a red flag. I learned early in my career that whenever someone tells me, like, you're the only therapist that I trust, or you're the only therapist that can help me, I'm like, oh, absolutely not. There are many, many therapists out there that can help you.
And I'm going to refer you to one right now.
Yes. It never goes well after that.
Oh my
So
God.
if someone tells you, like, you're the only person for me on the first date, like, nope, no, I'm not.
Oh. Well,
But-
what about the weird, funny, cringy moments in dating?
Oh gosh, we've all had those. I have a friend who went on an app date and the woman brought her mother without asking.
No. Oh my God.
Yeah.
No. See, and I know our listeners think that sometimes we're talking about stuff that seems absolutely absurd and ridiculous.
No, this really happened.
It happened.
Yep. It really did. So that is definitely a cringy moment. Well, my friend who had this happen is a very nice person, and she just introduced herself to the mom, invited them both to sit down, and they ate some tacos, and then they never spoke again.
I bet they did not.
Yeah, like that's so bizarre. You don't do that.
No. You
cannot bring an extra person on a date without clarifying that first.
Right.
Yeah. So
No
have
pet.
you had any, no pets also
No
without
pets,
asking. Have you had any particular cringy first date moments?
I can't think of any. I think I've been pretty lucky so far.
Well, you're a good screener too.
Yeah, and I've been lucky that I haven't had anybody do anything freakishly weird.
Yep. Oh, I've got the cringiest story.
Okay. Cringier than the one you just said. Okay.
Oh yeah, the mom is benign compared to this. So this friend of mine, who also happens to be a therapist, went out on a date with someone, and after the date, I think they were watching a movie or watching a show or something, sitting on the couch, and she noticed that the person's arms were really smooth, and she said, "Oh, your arms are so smooth. Do you shave them?" And the person said, "No, I eat my own arm hair."
That is not true.
I swear on my grandmother's grave, that is a true story.
Do you think she was being serious about it?
100%. And then, so the person says this to my friend, and they said, "That's kind of weird, huh?" And my friend was like, "No, it's totally fun."
Oh, God. And how do you immediately start trying to find the exit? Immediately. And if you had your arm around them, you'd pull it. Oh my God. That is just no.
Yep. And so it turns out that both of us are therapists, and there are definitely, there's hair pulling disorder and skin picking disorders are a thing, but I really never heard of someone who ate their arm hair. And it turns out it's actually a thing. It is like a mental health disorder. I'm sorry.
Oh my God. So it's like a step beyond trichotillomania or whatever that is.
Yes. But we don't call it that anymore. But yes. No. Now I feel kind of bad, like I'm going to get dogged for insulting someone who has a mental health disorder. But if you eat your own arm hair, don't share that on the first date. That's not going to go well.
And I'm just going to say, if you do, don't ever share it.
Don't tell anyone.
Don't tell anybody. Except your therapist, who cannot ever out you for it.
Yeah. Well, there is this whole movement of like, it's okay to not be okay. Ooh, I think there might be a healthy dose of shame about a few things that we want to hang on to.
You could get a nice razor and just trim that baby back. Oh my God. No.
Yeah. So those are the bringing the mom on the date and the eating your own arm hair might be two cringy things.
It's very cringy. And what do you think about this? Is an interesting question. What do you think about the splitting of the bill? That and I'm going to say this: the splitting of the bill whenever, let's say you go out in the evening and you have happy hour, and one person doesn't drink and the other person does, and they have a couple of drinks and you don't have any, and then you want to split the bill. How do you handle that?
Yep. If it was the first date, I would go, probably, depending on how big the inequity was, I would probably just go ahead and split it. And then I wouldn't go on a second date, because that's, again, goes back to paying attention. And I will also say that this happens to me a lot. Well, I wouldn't say a lot, because most of my friends are very conscientious about this, but I do not drink alcohol anymore. That would be topic for another episode. I went pro young and had to retire early.
It went hard.
But when I go out with friends, I mean, and sometimes we'll be in a situation where people are having multiple drinks. So, someone will have 4 drinks and I'll have 0 drinks. And then they'll be like, hey, let's just split it 50-50. It's super annoying, because I don't want to be the cheapskate who doesn't want to pony up for something, but I also don't really want to pay for someone else's drink. So, if you ordered something really expensive and the other person ordered an appetizer, don't ask to split the bill 50-50. That's not cool.
Right. And if you've decided in advance that you ask the person out on a date and you want to pick up the tab anyway, that's a different story.
Sure. Absolutely.
But just being mindful as you date, and even in just regular social settings, that if you have somebody in the group that doesn't drink or doesn't eat as much or whatever, and you're just, everybody's pounding drinks, that person just shouldn't have to pay that much of the tab.
For sure. And that, again, just goes back to paying attention. That I think there is a fine line too, because if the bill's fairly even, if mine costs $3 less than yours, then yeah, of course we're going to split it 50-50. I'm not going to nickel and dime you and get off the calculator, because that also seems a little bit weird for someone to actually calculate to the penny what they owe. But if you know that it's very inequitable, then you should speak up and not ask to split 50-50.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep, that is true.
So what about takeaways? Thinking about those, one thing that is a big takeaway is the idea of not having, if you're connecting with somebody, you probably are not having to decode whether or not it's a good thing. Whether or not it's you typically, you're not having, you feel the vibes, it feels mutual. And so it really isn't as hard as I think everybody makes it out to be, that the connection, if it's right, usually you feel it.
Yes, I think that's so true. And to further that idea, I think not every first date has to be magical. You're really just on an information gathering mission, and don't be super disappointed if it doesn't feel like magic. That it's okay. You have to just gather enough information to determine if you want to see the person again.
And I also love the idea that you may not want to go out with that other person as in a dating position, but if you may walk away and think, wow, that's somebody I'd like to be friends with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the definition of a successful first date would be that you leave with some kind of clarity about whether you want to move forward with the second date, or if it's a no, that's also a success because you walked away knowing what you wanted.
Yep. And don't be afraid to say it. Just don't be afraid to say it. Like, this was great, and I would love to potentially stoke up a friendship. I don't think I want to push into a dating relationship, but if you're interested.
Yes, absolutely. And something that I really want to emphasize here is that the right person is not going to make you decode the vibes or decode what's happening. It's going to feel easy and it's going to feel clear. If you feel unsure, then they may be looking for something different than what you're looking for. It may not be the best vibe. We're going to talk soon about situationships on this podcast. So if it doesn't feel clear, that's good information for you to have, because that's probably not the right person for you.
Yeah, agree. Well, we've given the audience a lot of information.
Yes. And so let's just sort of wrap up with some of the things we talked about today. And the first thing I would say in any dating situation is just pay attention to your energy around the person. That if they make you feel energized, that's a good sign. If they make you feel drained, that's probably not a really good sign.
Yep. And then being curious and being a good listener. That's, I think, through everything, that
Always.
is right at the top of the list of importance.
Yes. And we told you guys about some red flags. Don't ignore those. Even if the person is super hot, don't ignore the red flags.
And then nice balance, a really nice balance between not oversharing and then showing some degree of vulnerability and opening up a bit.
Yes, being interested and interesting, not trauma dumping, but not having 3 doors to the vault either. So, as always, we want you guys to send us your stories. We want to hear from you. We also would love for you to follow us on Instagram at Get Dateable. And please share our podcast with your friends. We're excited to be building up our listenership, and we love it when you share us with your loved ones. So please keep doing that.
In our next episode, we'll be talking about avoiding the situationship spiral when it's time to define things.
Yes, so be sure to join us for that. Thank you again for listening to the Dateable AF podcast, where we help you find your happy ending.
And remember, be bold, be kind, and for the love of queer dating, don't text your ex. Stay dateable.
AF.